This week on Quadriga, Crisis Summit, last chance for Europe. Brussels is gearing up for a showdown. Tensions are running high ahead of this crucial summit. Europe's future is at stake. All previous attempts to solve the debt crisis have proven insufficient. The threat of financial meltdown continues to grow, driving fear into the hearts of Europeans. In Berlin, Frankfurt, Paris, and Rome, people have taken to the streets, voicing their frustration and their anger. Your host this week is Terry Martin.
Hello and welcome. Is the European debt crisis spinning out of control? Why have all previous efforts to contain the crisis failed? And what's holding up agreement among EU leaders on what to do next? That's what we're talking about this week on Quadriga.
Joining Terry Martin in the studio, Michael Burda is an economics professor at Humboldt University of Berlin. Much of his work focuses on European integration issues, and he's co-author of the widely used textbook Macroeconomics, a European Text. Ulrike Gero is head of the Berlin office of the European Council on Foreign Relations. An expert on European integration issues, she's a frequent commentator on Germany's role in Europe. Ursula Weidenfeld is a freelance journalist specializing in business and economic policy. She's written extensively for Germany's Wirtschaftswoche and the Financial Times Deutschland, and has a regular column in the Berlin daily Tagesspiegel.
So here we are again. Despite massive efforts to fix the European debt crisis, it just keeps on growing. Now, European leaders were supposed to come up with some kind of solution this weekend in Brussels, but progress is looking doubtful. It looks like they're going to have a second summit next week. Let me ask you, Ulrike, what is the main sticking point? What is holding up progress towards a solution on what to do with the European Financial Stability Facility?
Well, I think we are basically lagging foot since 18 months, and we have let infection go. So, I mean, we had a small problem at the beginning with Greece, and then over 18 months we haven't been able to put clear solutions on the table and courageous and political solutions. So now we are dealing with contingency effects, and we have attacks of markets on Italy, Spain, and other countries. So the crisis has moved far beyond Greece. The current problems, I think, stem from the very fact that there's no Franco-German agreement on a couple of things, and France and Germany are key as always, because if you don't have a Franco-German agreement, you cannot sort of move the European Union ahead. One problem is certainly that France has elections to come, so the French establishment is basically already in a presidential campaign, and they're not pricing in the European themes into the campaigning, so that is a problem. France cannot act. France is not willing to reform its economy, so France has a couple of problems. On this crisis mechanism, more precisely, I think the problem is that France and Germany are basically, and this is not new, right? It's not new. We have a paradigm discussion on how to fix the fiscal and monetary policy within the Eurozone since 20 years, basically. The French have been talking about gouvernance économique since 20 years, and now it all comes to push to shelves, which is that the French want to have a different role of the ECB in the system. The Germans are talking about security solutions of the EFSF, and we are basically trading what could be a solution that appeases markets, that is sort of bold enough to amplify the EFSF. We are looking for lender of last resort in the ESF, in the monetary system, and we have Franco-German disputes on how this can be organized.
Okay, you put quite a few issues on the table there right at the very beginning. Well, let's try to break this down to the crux of what is holding up progress on this summit that's supposed to happen on Sunday. Already expectations are being played down. It seems that France and Germany disagree on one fundamental point, and that is how to leverage the money that's in this EFSF bailout fund. We've got 440 billion euros on the table, but everyone agrees that it really isn't enough to do the trick, that this has to be somehow leveraged. As I understand it, Michael Burda, the French want to create a bank out of the EFSF that can then borrow money from the European Central Bank. The Germans are saying, no, let's go for a kind of insurance model that would allow the EFSF to insure the bonds, the sovereign debt that would be issued by the individual states. Now, are these positions really very far apart?
Well, there are differences of opinion because there are differences of interest. The French banks have the most to lose by a haircut in Greece right now. The Germans have a lot to lose by haircuts in other countries that might occur because of knock-on effects.
Spain and Italy, for example.
Spain and Italy. And right now there's a disagreement as to what is needed right now. I think the Germans would like to spend less money because the Germans will end up paying more than the French in the end. The French have the banks at risk, and the French are looking to help their banks in the first instance because a failure of the Greeks to make payment or a default would certainly hurt them asymmetrically. The big model, the bank model, means that this new facility will be able to borrow money from the ECB and increase its firepower, but it also increases its risk. And financial markets will look to this and with a bit of skepticism. Is the ECB really willing to get behind this full-blown? I think if the ECB committed itself to defending some value of bonds on the market, that it would deter a lot of speculation that we consider to be noise and perhaps driven by irrational expectations or concentrated efforts to destabilize the euro. If that's not the case, then German taxpayers are going to end up paying a lot of money in the end. So that's the fear, I think, right now. The French don't see it that way because I think they would gain the most from having the bank solution. The guarantee solution is a bit like a derivative, if you like, or it's like a conditional bet. If there's a default, then basically someone will step in this state of affairs, but not in all state of affairs. And the question is, can that really be enough to help these bigger countries that are on the table too?
Ursula Weidenfeld, will it be enough? That's the question.
I'm not sure whether it will be enough, but I think Germans and French do disagree deeply in the question how much Germany is willing to pay and how much it is able to pay.
But it's also about what sorry to interrupt you, but the role of the European Central Bank. That seems to be a very fundamental problem. Germany's already said, it's got 211 billion euros invested in this EFSF bailout fund. No more is going to come. You're going to have to figure out how to use it more efficiently. So it kind of comes down to the role of the ECB, doesn't it?
Well, I think the Germans I'm sure that it would be a wrong thing to make the ECB something like an investment bank, and that would it be for the members of the eurozone. So they won't agree to a model which makes the ECB a bank.
There you go. This role of the ECB. I mean, when the ECB was created, it said, okay, its main priority is price stability. We want to fight inflation in the Eurozone. Now it's buying up bonds in the secondary market, which is a very controversial move. We've seen resignations in the European Central Bank. Well, clearly, we're not going to get all that sorted out this weekend in Brussels. Already, expectations have been played down radically as to what is going to come out of that summit in Brussels on this weekend. And it's a very interesting summit indeed. You've got all 27 foreign ministers and finance ministers meeting on Saturday. Then you've got a meeting of all 27 European leaders, followed by a meeting of the 17 Eurozone leaders on Sunday. They were supposed to come up with something. A lot of expectations moving into it, but we don't know what's going to come out of that.
The world's leading industrialized and developing nations are putting tremendous pressure on Europe. A week ago, the G20 demanded a decisive plan to end the debt crisis. That's exactly what they're hoping will emerge from this weekend summit. The South African finance minister put it this way.
Well, it's all about leadership. It's about decisiveness. It's about getting ahead of the curve and developing the financial firepower.
Just one day later, the spokesman for the German government tried to play down expectations. He said the dream that this package can have everything solved and sorted out by Monday will not be fulfilled.
Well, it's clear that everything is not going to be solved and sorted out by Monday, but Herman van Rompuy, the president of the European Council, said that the decision that's going to be made in Brussels on Sunday, even though a follow-up summit will probably be needed, he said it's going to have the weight and credibility to calm the markets. What are you expecting from this summit this weekend?
Well, hopefully we can expect something that will appease and calm markets. But as you said, I mean, there's a reason that we have a second council meeting. It's probably because we still have to negotiate, because there's still Franco-German dispute, and because what we have to negotiate, it's not peanuts. So there's a huge legal things involved. And I think what really the problem is, and it's nearly tragic in a way, is that as the South African finance minister said, it's all about leadership and decisiveness. But the big sort of bold, courageous political jumps that we could do, I mean, let's just say Eurobonds or mutualization of debt or whatever, you cannot do them because you need treaty change. So you have no all options available for the quick fix that markets are expecting. And this is the tragedy. There are perhaps a couple of options out there. We may dispute or not whether ECB could be lender of last resort, whether that's a good choice or not a choice. But there are a couple of choices available which systemically could close the system hermetically. The problem is that these solutions are not available solution in a legal sense, and you would need treaty change. This is, by the way, why the Germans have been engaging into discussions about treaty change as the midterm option, changing 136, creating a stability union, how this is called, improving fiscal surveillance. But this is in a way the tragedy that for the sort of bold solutions you need more time. So we need a decisive momentum next Sunday that buys time, but it will certainly not be a quick fix and overnight we will wake up and the crisis is over.
Well, it's interesting. Chancellor Merkel mentioned indeed exactly the prospect of a treaty change. Says she's not afraid of a treaty change. She said that this past week at a ceremony in Frankfurt for the outgoing.
But I think it's not only about a treaty change. You need to change the German constitution to do this.
I agree.
If you change, you want to change the German constitution, at that point, you have to ask people.
Okay.
It has to be a referendum. It's not something the Parliament can decide or the Chancellor can decide.
Now, these are long-term issues. When you're talking about treaty changes at the European level, you're talking about changing the German constitution. This is kind of down the road, and maybe this will be needed at some point. But right now, the leaders who are getting together in Brussels over the weekend are dealing with a crisis that they need to manage and come up with something to fix right now. The big word in the room is leverage. How to leverage the $440 billion that's in the EFSF. It seems that there's no way around that. It's going to have to be leveraged somehow. Michael Burda, you're an economist. You know a lot about macroeconomics. When you hear this word leverage and you see the French and the German models being put on the table, are you able to calculate the risks that are associated with that? How do economists go about calculating the risks, and do the people who are making the decisions about this really understand the implications?
Well, it's hard enough for economists to agree on the implications of this, and financial experts. I think if you try to communicate this to the general public, it gets very dangerous and people get very nervous. The financial crisis was brought about because banks were over-leveraged. Banks exceeded their limits, and when they didn't have them, they lobbied to get leverage increases. And the financial crisis in America was basically a product of that. So it's natural for us to mistrust borrowing money on the basis of very small, own skin in the game. And that's exactly what this new institution would be doing. So one has to be sure that what happens with this money is going to actually have an effect. And I think the Germans rightfully are concerned that this is what the Germans call a Fass ohne Boden. It's a barrel without a bottom. It's without, you can imagine the Greeks have unfortunately not done what they were supposed to do, not just in the past 2 years. They haven't done what they were supposed to do in the past 10 years. How can you trust them to do what they're supposed to do for the next 10 years? And if you pay this valuable money, which is still valuable, what's the guarantee that something's going to come in the end? So I think we haven't talked about this yet, but I think the people that are financing this game need to understand, and they want to understand, that the countries that are in trouble are actually reforming their economies in a sustainable way that's going to affect their ability to pay back the debt in the future. I think if Greece wants to stay in the euro area, they've got to reform their economy, not just cutting wages and increasing taxes. They're going to have to make their economy more flexible. They're going to have to bring in foreign investment and make it more attractive to people in France and Germany to do serious investment to reform those economies. That's going to be the point.
And
Greece
they will have to make their people pay taxes.
Of course. I mean, the big joke in Greece is that no one pays taxes. I mean, it's no wonder if the average doctor earns 30,000 euros a year. I can understand why he doesn't pay taxes. So,
well, Greece obviously has its work cut out for it. There are different notions on what Greece needs to do in order to actually come out of this crisis and how the European Union can best help it. But it's not just Greece. I want to get back to the whole question about what the summiteers are working on this weekend in Brussels, which includes Greece, of course. It looks like Greece will get the next 8 billion euro tranche in its specific bailout fund to get it over the next few months. Ursula Weidenfeld, I want to come back to what Michael was talking about regarding the parliaments, whether they really signed up for what the summiteers are talking about this weekend in Brussels. There was ahead of that summit, there was a paper circulated, guidelines, about a 70-page document that was circulated just a couple of days ago, and the parliamentarians here in Berlin had no idea really what that meant. First of all, it was issued only in English, and they complained a lot. What are we being asked to think about here? Are principles of democracy at a parliamentary level in the individual Eurozone countries being challenged through what is happening in Brussels this weekend?
Yes, obviously they are. It is a problem not only to parliaments but to ministers, to members of the governments, that they don't know what will be negotiated, what will be the outcome, what will they have to agree to. It's quite a problem. I think politicians are not ready to agree to a central bank which is totally different from what the Bundesbank has been, which will be something like an investment bank. I think they don't know what the outcome will be, but they think it will be nothing good for Germany, and it will change our monetary system in a way we don't want and we won't agree to.
One of the risks that's associated with the plan is inflation. I'm hearing talk now from different economists that if the EFSF rescue fund is leveraged the way in either of the plans, it looks like it's heading towards the German insurance model plan. That's the latest talk. Who knows what's going to be agreed to? But that Europe may end up looking at inflation rates of 3 to 4, maybe even 5% over the next several years moving down the road. Is this a real danger? I'm going to ask you first, Michael, because you are an economist. Do you see inflation possibly on the horizon as a risk of what they're talking about now?
Inflation is like a tanker. It's like an oil tanker. It takes a long time to get moving, and we don't really know what the initial sort of spark is that gets it going. Usually it's a commodity price change, or maybe we know in the middle to long run it's about money, growth of the money supply. So the German concerns, and also I might add the French concerns about inflation, are driven by the concern that buying up debt from these countries will lead to an expansion of the money supply and will lead to inflation. And there is evidence that China's getting inflation, the United States is getting inflation, and it's just a matter of time before the Europeans import the inflation or have their own homegrown variety.
How dangerous is it?
Well, I mean, let's put it this way. Inflation was one of the reasons the Germans had the Bundesbank under wraps, or strapped down in terms of its monetary freedom, and the ECB had these restrictions as well. But crises tend to move people in directions that are unintended and perhaps even necessary. This is certainly a danger. I wouldn't exaggerate it. And again, it's a tanker. So think about that.
Okay, I want to take a step back. Many Europeans are, and not just Europeans, but this story is being watched all over the world very keenly in the United States. President Barack Obama has apparently also just had a telephone call with the French and German leaders on this issue, saying, okay, at least we've recognized the problem. I want to ask you, Ulrike, how did we get here? Why have the previous efforts to deal with this crisis not done the job? Did the people who are making the decisions fail to recognize the size of the problem, or did they overestimate the impact of the measures that they've agreed to so far?
Well, I think we are trapped by the complexity of the thing, because in a way we have many crises. We have a systemic banking crisis, we have a sovereign debt crisis, and we, in a way, don't have a euro crisis. The euro has flaws, and the flaws can be fixed, but the currency is not the problem in itself. We have a sovereign debt crisis, and we have a banking crisis, and the amalgamation is a sort of the problem, because basically we play a banking crisis against the sovereign debt crisis, and the taxpayers anyway annoyed. So the problem is that the euro as currency comes under pressure now, and instead of being the solution for which it was invented in the first place, it becomes now to be the scapegoat. And that is an amalgaming in the political communication about the whole thing. So we are trapped by complexity, and this is bad, because what anyway has happened already is that we have lost credibility among peoples. The solutions are anyway too complex, you cannot convey them, and this is why all the discussion is basically dominated by the easy sort of solutions. The Greeks have been cheating, the Greeks are lazy, the Germans are fine, so let's drop them out. And this is in a way the dangerous trap here, because of course the things are not that easy, because if we don't save the Greeks, we save the banks, and this is the discussion. It's a little bit right pocket, left pocket, and there's no honesty in the discussion.
Let's take even one step further back, to go back to the birth of the euro, and when currency union was agreed to, when Germany and France said, okay, we'll go along with this, and to some degree it seemed that Germany was willing to forfeit control over its own fiscal policy, or at least its monetary policy through the through the Bundesbank. That was the price of German unification. However, when that happened, it seemed that the leaders were unable to agree on the underpinnings of a common currency, that is economic and fiscal policy, that they would have a common European economic and fiscal policy underpinning a common currency. Could this crisis perhaps address that problem, that in the end you might end up with the treaty changes that you mentioned?
I agree. I mean, I don't agree on the price for unification, because I think that also economically the euro was good for Germany, because we have been the anchor currency, and this is largely underestimated, and it was heavy for us to carry the other currencies. So we also had a huge benefits, because the other countries, especially the periphery, could no longer devaluate, could no longer inflate, and this is also where the German export boom basically is lying upon. But yes, there is one truth. In '92, everybody knew that a currency union would not fly without political union and with some sort of fiscal entity, whether we call this European Treasury, whether we call it European taxation, whether we call it fiscal mechanism, which are indirect through Eurobonds, whatever. But without any fiscal entity, you cannot run a currency union. We knew it by '92. We hope that we go over it. We hope that we fix the system sort of afterwards. We didn't do so. So basically, the real astonishing question is how it could hold 18 years without basically bursting before. And it's the financial crisis that brought the flaws of monetary union to daylight. So I think today we fix it or we don't. And that's the choice of today.
Massive complexity. We're dealing right now with a sovereign debt crisis, as you mentioned. We've got the financial crisis. We've got the economic crisis. All this crisis has caused people to question the fundamentals of the systems that they're living in, the economic systems, the political system, the socio-economic political matrix that we all live in. It's bringing people out onto the streets. Even though they might not understand it, they know something is wrong.
They call themselves the 99%. They bring to mind the flower power generation, the Arab Spring, and above all, the American protest movement Occupy Wall Street. The 8,000 people who demonstrated in Berlin's government quarter last week were a colorful group. They were protesting against a political establishment that's failed to rein in the speculative excesses of a financial elite. They condemn the predatory practices of hedge funds and the power of the banks, saying this is a system that's evolved without a hint of democracy. Just a few people get rich at the cost of everyone else.
Ursula, when you look at this mess, where do you point the finger? How did we get into all this? Is this a systemic problem? Is the capitalist system flawed?
I think the biggest mistake was to deregulate banking, to take away rules from investment banking, from the monetary system. It's not about the capitalism as a whole, and I think it's not about regulation. More regulation doesn't mean better regulation. What we need now, and this is the point, people are right, it is that we need better regulation on banking, on monetary issues, on things like this. But I think the social market economy, as we call it in Germany, is not as at stake. It shouldn't be. There's no better solution.
Well, I think different visions in Europe are prevalent about what Europe should be. And one vision is sort of the United States of America. Every country is like a state of the United States, as a federal government. And there's another vision that it's a much more centralized version, with Brussels being in charge of a lot of things. And I tend to take the former. I think the United States could be a good model for Europe. Unfortunately, the ECB was founded with the idea that governments would keep their fiscal house in order, and that didn't happen. We didn't pay attention. We lost our eye on the ball. And we also didn't think about the European bank as an institution of risk, a source of risk, systemic risk. I think if we'd allowed for a more aggressive regulation of trans-European banking at the beginning, we wouldn't have this problem, because then a French bank in Germany would not have allowed, or operating in Greece would not have allowed its branch to lend money to the Greek government at the same interest rate that it would be lending to the German government. So you would have internalized the problem from the start. But the European leaders are just human. I won't blame them for everything, but they missed the ball in 1990, 1992, 1995, and 1999. So, I mean, we're paying the price. We've got to move forward and do something better this time.
How did they miss the ball?
Well, I'm with Mr. Burda. Basically, I think intellectually you need some federal elements in the system. So either we have the honesty to face this, be that a different kind of ECB or be this fiscal treasury. I mean, if we go into mutualization of debt, then the legal the consequences that you would also have the right to tax. If not, it just doesn't make sense.
There we go. Taxation.
So we need. I mean, if we want this
without representation.
Without representation. Yeah, no, not without representation, because
but
then
it is without representation.
Okay, but this is
union.
the problem. This is the problem. I'm not without taxation. We would need to reconstitute what you could call the politics of Eurobonds, which is the legitimacy question behind. I'm not sitting here to say this is possible or doable or in the realm of political utopia, but the thing is that everything that is on the table now, we need to talk about to which extent we stop the right of national sovereignty of budget, whether we have a strong European hand to go to hold it or to have fiscal surveillance, how you make this happen, how you make automatic sanction happen, how you legitimize them. Do you legitimize them on the national level or on the European level, and so on and so forth. So I don't have the answers, but the right question is that at least we are intellectually honest.
Big changes on the horizon. I want to thank you all for your input on this. Michael Burda, Ulrike Gerhardt, and Ursula Weidenfeld. And thank you all for tuning in. I'm sure we'll be talking about this a lot more down the road. Stay with us here on DW TV.